Now, here are Morgan Streetman and Roxanne Wilder.
Hey, Tampa Bay. Happy President's Day today.
Back at you, sir.
All right. Well, today, we made a false promise last week, and the promise was that Roxanne would be back this week, but she wasn't able to make it in today, which is totally understandable.
Yes, she got her hands full still. She got the little bambino that is still nursing, and you being the nice guy that you are.
I gave her the day off. What can I
did.
say?
You know, she didn't have to come in. She normally is in here by 5:15 in the morning for Q105. So
I gave
you gave her
the whole crew of Q105 the day off today. I saw Mason posted about that. He was sleeping in this morning. I said, my goodness.
Yeah, he's all.
But Money Talk's on the air.
That's right.
We had Beyond the Law this morning, and now we got the Morgan Streetman Show.
And then back again at 5 o'clock with Morgan Streetman.
The replay at 5. You can't miss that one, particularly the drive time, folks.
Right.
Now, if you're here with us live at 10 o'clock this morning, and you want to get on the line with us, we'd love to hear from you today on President's Day, and it'd be a perfect day to do it because you don't have to worry about your boss walking in on you, catching you listening to the Morgan Streetman Show when you're supposed to be working.
And we know they're out there because I got a lot of calls. I got more calls today in traffic, helping me with traffic on I-4 than on normal days. So the folks are out there listening.
Well, the eagle eyes are out there watching today. They're out there watching. So give us a call, 888-404-1010. We'd love to hear from you on any of the topics that we're going to talk about. We're going to do something a little bit different today than what we normally do, as we try to do on some of these holiday shows, these memorial shows. Try to give you something a little bit different, try to make it somewhat enjoyable. And we're going to get into that in just a minute. I want to cover just a couple of quick things before we do get into that, including our quick look back. I'll tell you what, I don't know if you heard the news. There was a good bit of news out last week, including, the news out of the Justice Department that they have decided not to pursue prosecution against Andrew McCabe, which this is on one particular, as commentators have pointed out, including Trey Gowdy, this is on one particular discrete set of facts. But, hey, it's a pretty important set of facts, and that is when Andrew McCabe lied to the FBI multiple times over, quite a long period of time, like 6 or 8 months. He got interviewed several times. At least 3 of the times he was interviewed, he was actually put under oath. And, here's the deputy director of the FBI, so nobody knows better than him the fact that lying to the FBI is a crime. And what they were trying to investigate is whether or not he had anything to do with leaking some stories to the New York Times, basically stories that cast him in a more favorable light as part of the Clinton investigation. So without getting into all the details, he was leaking part of an ongoing investigation. Remember that sacred thing? You can't even ask about ongoing investigations. They certainly couldn't give you any details about it, except when they want to leak things out that make themselves look better. They can do that. But more to the point, then afterwards, when the FBI catches on and assumes, well, it's probably got to be him that leaked the stuff out. It makes the most sense, right? And they go start questioning him about it. And he says, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. No, it wasn't me. Absolutely not. And he does this. And then they think, well, let's go back and let's raise the stakes with him a little bit. Let's put him under oath. And they do that. And then let's put him under oath again, and let's do it again. They put him under oath 3 times, and all 3 times he lies to them. And it causes them, according to their own testimony, the FBI agents themselves who were running the investigation into the leaks, it causes them to go off and start to try to look at other possible sources of this leaked information. And according to what the lead agent on the investigation said, they spent a lot of time, wasted, quote unquote, a lot of resources looking into this, and they could have avoided all that if Andrew McCabe had been honest with them, as he was required to do by law and as he well knew he was required to do. Now, keep in mind, these are the same people that want General Flynn to go to jail for some period of time now because he supposedly lied to the FBI, even though he wasn't put under oath. He wasn't given any warning whatsoever that he was the subject of an investigation. And in fact, we understand the original reports from that interview actually say by the 2 investigating agents who were there, one of whom was Peter Strzok and one of whom was a guy named Joseph Pientka III, who is known as Supervisory Special Agent. You're not allowed to say his name, quote unquote. It's under court order for those people who are involved in the court case, which, of course, doesn't apply to us, doesn't apply to the media at large. And his name is out there. It's well known by folks that are knowledgeable of sort of the granular level details of this stuff, that he was the other FBI agent that went and interviewed General Flynn. Well, apparently when he and Peter Strzok came back and they wrote up their 302s, which is the FBI's way of recording an interview, right, is they come back and they write their notes down about what you said and stuff like that. Now, silly me, what would I think? I think, why don't you just record the interview, right? Take a tape recorder. Wouldn't that make the most sense? But no, that's not how we're going to do it. We're going to have the FBI agents come back and write down what you said. And that's one good reason you never really probably want to talk to the FBI without your lawyer present or some kind of record to have the interview actually transcribed so that you can prove what you actually said and what you didn't say. Because if you don't have that there, like General Flynn didn't, then you know what's going to happen. Whatever they said in their little 302 report that you said becomes what you said for all intents and purposes, and that's what we see playing out.
You don't get a chance to sign off on that?
They don't run it by you, but you know who they do run it by? They spent several weeks editing this 302, and you know who got to have the final say on the edits? Andrew McCabe.
I figured that.
Oh, he wasn't even there. What part does he have to have any part in the edits? Well, it's called he has part of the setup of General Flynn. So they want to put General Flynn in jail for 6 months, so he pled guilty. That's a real complicated story. If you really look into the details of that, they didn't give him any of the information. He didn't even, frankly, remember exactly what he'd said. And so he assumed if they told him that he'd done something wrong, he assumed that he must have done something wrong. He must have not remembered something properly when they came and asked him about it, okay? But now the guy who's the deputy director of the FBI, he does it 3 times in a row under oath, even more than that in total, but 3 times in a row under oath, he's found guilty of official misconduct by the Inspector General report, but the Justice Department has decided not to even prosecute him. Not to even prosecute him at all. Meanwhile, they're talking about wanting to throw Roger Stone in jail for 7 to 9 years, basically a death sentence for that guy. And these are very complicated matters, and it's really sad to me to see that people seem to look at these matters and they just read the headlines. And I got a couple friends I was talking to over the weekend, and they really come from the more liberal perspective. And boy, they are just up in arms about putting Roger Stone in jail. And, he lied to Congress. Are you kidding me? Do you know how many people have been caught lying to Congress? James Comey's been caught lying to Congress. John Brennan's been caught lying to Congress. James Clapper's been caught lying to Congress. And these guys have all lied to the FBI probably as well. We don't have all those interview records, but we're sure they probably said the same things to the FBI, which have now been proven to be false. So they just lie and they lie and they lie. And when they're in the Department of Just Us, the in crowd, the Department of Just Us, they get away with it. But if it's you and me or anybody else or certainly anybody even remotely connected to President Trump, off with their head. Off with their head is the answer. And, anyway, it's kind of interesting because you see these folks who are really anti-Trump. We shouldn't really say liberal because they're not actually all that liberal, but they're anti-Trump. And they want these guys like General Flynn and Roger Stone to serve jail time. But then I ask them, what about Andrew McCabe? Shouldn't he? He did actually more than what they are alleged to have done.
And what do they say?
They say it's nonsense. That's what they say. Oh, that's not true. McCabe's a good guy. And they don't have an actual knowledge of the factual details. Why? Because the media covers it up. They don't tell it to you. You got to go out and dig for it to get to some of this stuff. And, and this kind of reminds me, and I'll tell you what, it's hard to have conversations with these people, frankly. They're so committed to their position, and they're so, what's the right word, militant about it? They're angry about it. It's war.
I was in the same type of conversation yesterday with my son who's in the military, and he was going in the direction of, without saying it, supporting Trump, and it started going the opposite direction. I had to excuse myself so quickly and leave there because it was going to get very ugly with some very close friends.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. I know who's coming out on top of that one. Your son. I'll tell you what. They better be careful who they're messing with. Your son is a high-speed operator.
Right before we take the break, do you think that Trump will be impeached again?
Isn't that? That's what they want to do. I think they're going to go for it. I think they're going to try, and they're trying to weave it in with this Bill Barr stuff. The total setup with the 4 prosecutors quitting the case when the Justice Department came in and got involved in the Roger Stone sentencing. And just as a headline, I think it was a total setup. As a headline, that sounds bad, but here's the thing. What you don't understand is those prosecutors came in and presented to the Department of Justice, this is what we want to ask the court for. And then they actually went to the court and they asked for a lot more than they had gotten permission to ask for. And so then the Justice Department said, wait a minute, you're asking for too much, essentially. And then that causes them, you can't get involved. You're getting involved in our prosecution, and we quit. And that was strictly a setup for media consumption and for the headlines. And, look, listen to people. It looks like it's working. We're going to talk some more about that when we come back on the Morgan Streetman Show. And welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show on this President's Day. And we do want to get into some of the stuff I've got for you special for President's Day, so we're going to hurry up and do that. But before we do that, we just wanted to point out the fact that Michael Avenatti, you may have heard, was convicted last week of extortion. Extorting Nike or attempting to extort Nike with what you call a quid pro quo. In other words, either you hire me and pay me $20 million or else I'm going to hold a press conference and it's going to destroy your stock price. And that's really the sum total of what happened. Who's convicted in the Southern District of New York up in Manhattan in federal court. He is possibly going to be sentenced to as much as 42 years in prison. Now, they probably won't go for the maximum with him, but maybe they will. I mean, what are going to be the mitigating factors? In other words, what are the reasons that he shouldn't get the maximum? And you start looking at a guy like Avenatti. Excuse me, I had some cinnamon tea in here, and it's got a little cinnamon in the back of my throat there. But you start looking at a guy.
About that.
Yeah. Well, I stirred it up just a second ago, and I chugged some of the cinnamon, and whoo! You start looking at a guy like Avenatti, though, and you got to wonder what are the mitigating factors in the sentencing, okay? And, of course, he'll be sentenced in mid-June on this particular case. And there are also cases pending out in California, charges of fraud and tax crimes, which, we don't have time to go through with you right here today. But, he's certainly looking at more than likely being convicted on that. And I heard today on Beyond the Law you guys were talking, and, actually the California bar is investigating him and probably most likely going to take away his law license based on this conviction. They were already pretty far along in their investigation, actually. In fact, he was at a hearing for his bar license when they came in and arrested him recently when they decided to revoke his bail. So that can't impress the bar examiners very much when the federal agents, the FBI, come in at your bar hearing and arrest you on the spot. So now remember, this is a guy who was going to be a Democrat presidential candidate, and he had even declared for a while and was the hope of some people, including Ana Navarro, who said he was like the Holy Spirit, if you remember that quote. We've played that on the show before. But I wanted to just swing back, and then we're going to get into the president's stuff. And I wanted to swing back real quickly, though, to a study, because this kind of ties in with what we're talking about, the ability to talk to people. A study out of the University of North Carolina that studied about a couple thousand college students. Actually, I think it was about 1,000 college students they sent a survey out to and who responded. And really what I wanted to really focus in on, and I'll just mention this because we don't have time to really talk too much about it, but it focuses on the fact that how much isolation socially conservatives are feeling in college. 92% of reported conservatives said that they would be friends with a liberal. And only 3% of conservatives said that they would not have a liberal friend in college. Well, when you look at liberals, though, what's the numbers on that? Almost 25% of liberals said they would not have a conservative friend.
Not surprised.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we see out there. As we
that's
go
what
around
you
and talk
hear.
to people.
I hear that from friends of mine.
It's really getting bad out there, but it's interesting to see the divide there. That conservatives are willing to have liberal friends, and I'm willing to still talk to my liberal friends. But it's getting harder and harder for them to accept me and talk to me as a conservative. So, all right. Well, it is President's Day today, and I got 12 clips for you, but it totals about 33 minutes of presidential speeches. So we're not going to be able to get to all those. So I'm going to pick and choose some of the best ones over the past 50, 60 years, basically going back to FDR when we started maybe really widespread recording these presidential speeches, and they got the audio quality to stand up. So we've got some of our favorite portions of some of our favorite presidential speeches. And, of course, one unifying theme you'll notice is that a lot of these have to do with war. So let's go back to the 1933 inaugural speech by Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
This is preeminently the time to speak the truth, the whole truth, frankly and boldly. Nor need we shrink from honestly facing conditions in our country today. This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive and will prosper. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror, which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance.
Wow. I tell you what, FDR was really in order, and we got a phone call, which we did solicit, so we'll take the phone call. Let's hear from Ed. Ed, hey, how are you doing?
I'm real well. Hey, I just had a question for you about what your thoughts are on this recent case where the government, the Department of Justice, changed its sentencing recommendation after it appears that President Trump tweeted about and complained about the excessive sentence of something between 7 and 9 years. What are your thoughts about that one?
Well, Ed, my thoughts on that basically are that, it was not that the government changed its sentencing recommendation. If you look into the details of it, what happened is the prosecutors went to the Department of Justice. They went to the authorities up the line, not just the prosecutors in the courtroom, but up the line, and they said, this is what we want to recommend. And I don't know exactly what it was that they said they wanted to recommend, but I think it was significantly less than the 7 to 9 years. And that was actually approved by the Department of Justice. And then when they went into court and actually filed the papers that they filed asked for 7 to 9 years. So they asked for something that they had not gotten approval from. I mean, that's direct insubordination. And basically what happened is that the Justice Department said, well, look, that's clearly excessive and that's not appropriate, and we want to go back in and we want to change the request to the amount that was actually approved. Now, did Trump's tweet have anything to do with that? I don't think that it did, other than maybe calling attention to what had occurred. But, if you look at what Bill Barr has said, he said he's not going to be influenced by these things, and it really makes a lot of sense that if he had approved a particular sentencing recommendation and then the prosecutors went in and asked for something different than what was approved, I mean, that's direct insubordination. And why shouldn't he come in and change that? That was not an approved request. And then, of course, the 4 prosecutors resigned from the case. And what does that make it look like to me? It makes it look like a media stunt. The whole thing looks like a media setup. So that's basically what I think about that. What do you think about it, Ed?
Well, I just think it's interesting that 4 people resigned, and it's a big deal to resign from the Department of Justice.
But they didn't.
Such a great job. Yeah,
it is a great job, but they didn't actually resign from the Department of Justice. They just resigned from that case. That's an important distinction.
I thought one left the Department of Justice entirely.
Well, that's not what I've heard. I heard they just resigned from the case. But, maybe we will look into that some this week and be able to come back next week with a further update and report on that. But my understanding is they didn't actually resign from the Department of Justice, just from that particular case.
Okay.
So that would be an important distinction.
I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot for calling, Ed. Great to hear from you. Okay, Have a good one. All right, well, we'll jump back into, that was a great question, and we do want to address that some more and deal with that some more in the future. We want to jump back into some of these presidential speeches, though. I'm going to have to skip the day that will live in infamy's speech, where FDR actually declares war on Japan in December of 1941, following the Pearl Harbor bombing. And I'm also going to skip Truman's warning to the Japanese, because I see we're running out of time here to do all this. But let's get to President Truman on August 6th of 1945, talking about something that we just did over in Japan, in Hiroshima. And listen to the way he describes it.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy. That bomb has more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. The Japanese began the war from the air at Pearl Harbor. They have been repaid many-fold, and the end is not yet. With this bomb, we have now added a new and revolutionary increase in destruction to supplement the growing power of our armed forces. In their present form, these bombs are now in production, and even more powerful forms are in development. It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe. The force from which the sun draws its power has been loosed against those who brought war to the Far East.
Boy, it was almost a clinical description of it, wasn't he? He was very calm at that moment. He didn't really let on exactly what was going on, and of course it'd be a little while for folks really truly understood the power.
That pretty much started it all.
Yeah, that pretty much started it all. And we got so many good clips of presidential speeches that we want to get to. We got more clips than we've got time, unfortunately, but we're going to try to cover some of the great stuff, an interesting speech by Eisenhower, his farewell address in 1961, and then maybe get into some of the speeches by JFK, President Kennedy. We're probably going to have to pick and choose on those. We may have to skip his inaugural, which is Ask Not What Your Country Can Do for You, because we want to get into some of his other speeches, which are also pretty darn interesting. And then I got some great stuff from Reagan that I'm hoping we'll have time to get to, because he was one of the best. We'll be back on the Morgan Streetman Show. Welcome back, everybody, to the Morgan Streetman Show on this President's Day. And as you know, if you've been listening so far, we're trying to run through some of our favorite speeches by presidents that have been recorded and broadcast in the media. So that limits us somewhat. But some of our favorite speeches that we've heard over the past, about 70 years, actually better make that 87 years. But anyway, we've got some great ones for you, and we just want to jump kind of right back into those because we got so many and we got so little time. Now, this next one is Eisenhower's farewell address. President Eisenhower, he gave it January 17th of 1961. And, we just heard from President Truman about the bombing of Hiroshima, and I don't remember if we heard in the actual clip that I got there that they had spent $2 billion on the Manhattan Project. So I just want you to kind of think about that in the context of the money that we spend today, and there's some ways we could really look at that. In other words, maybe it's just the value of money has declined so significantly since then, but $2 billion was spent, and this built up part of this military-industrial complex, and it's a word that we hear a lot today, but this is where that word originated, is with President Eisenhower's warning in his farewell address.
But threats, new in kind or degree, constantly arise. Of these I mention two only. A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations.
Wow.
Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
You think we've done that? You think we've had the alert and watchful citizenry that has been concerned about the growth of the military-industrial complex? That's something to ponder. Something to ponder. Well, 3 days later, JFK... Excuse me, getting the cinnamon in my throat again. 3 days later, JFK gave his inaugural, saying, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country." And that was certainly a speech worth hearing, but we're going to skip over that. And in a very Florida-themed exercise, we're going to listen to this next speech from September 12th of 1962 that JFK, President Kennedy, gave at Rice University. And this is a little bit of a longer clip, but see if you recognize this one.
For the eyes of the world now look into space, to the moon and to the planets beyond. And we have vowed that we shall not see it governed by a hostile flag of conquest, but by a banner of freedom and peace. We have vowed that we shall not see space filled with weapons of mass destruction, but with instruments of knowledge and understanding. Yet the vows of this nation can only be fulfilled if we in this nation are first, and therefore we intend to be first. In short, our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men, and to become the world's leading spacefaring nation. We set sail on this new sea because there is new knowledge to be gained and new rights to be won, and they must be won and used for the progress of all people. For space science, like nuclear science and all technology, has no conscience of its own. Whether it will become a force for good or ill depends on man. And only if the United States occupies a position of preeminence can we help decide whether this new ocean will be a sea of peace or a new terrifying theater of war. I do not say that we should or will go unprotected against the hostile misuse of space any more than we go unprotected against the hostile use of land or sea. But I do say that space can be explored and mastered without feeding the fires of war, without repeating the mistakes that man has made in extending his writ around this globe of ours. There is no strife, no prejudice, no national conflict in outer space as yet. Its hazards are hostile to us all. Its conquest deserves the best of all mankind, and its opportunity for peaceful cooperation may never come again. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal?
Listen.
And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
Wow, he was a great orator, wasn't he? I mean, he was amazing. You know, and another great orator, and we're going to have to skip over President Kennedy's speech to the American Newspaper Association, where he talks about communism and it being a means of, they use secrecy to try to overcome us. And that's a great speech as well, one that I'd really love to play for you. But I want to get to President Reagan because he was another great orator. I mean, there haven't been many like him. And I'll tell you, if you go back and listen to some of President Reagan's speeches, you'll see the parallels with President Trump, not only in the subjects that they talk about, abortion and the sacredness of life, and other subjects like the involvement of religion in our culture and the importance of it. But you will also hear some of the same phrasings like "Make America Great Again." Now, this speech in particular that I want to play for you is President Reagan speaking to the National Association of Evangelicals in March of 1983. And let's see if you remember this one.
A number of years ago, I heard a young father, a very prominent young man in the entertainment world, addressing a tremendous gathering in California. It was during the time of the Cold War, and communism and our own way of life were very much on people's minds, and he was speaking to that subject. And suddenly, though, I heard him saying, "I love my little girls more than anything," and I said to myself, "Oh no, don't say that." But I had underestimated him. He went on, "I would rather see my little girls die now, still believing in God, than have them grow up under communism and one day die no longer believing in God." There were thousands of young people in that audience. They came to their feet with shouts of joy. They had instantly recognized the profound truth in what he had said with regard to the physical and the soul and what was truly important. Yes, let us pray for the salvation of all of those who live in that totalitarian darkness. Pray they will discover the joy of knowing God. But until they do, let us be aware that while they preach the supremacy of the state, declare its omnipotence over individual man, and predict its eventual domination of all peoples on the earth, they are the focus of evil in the modern world. It was C.S. Lewis who, in his unforgettable Screwtape letters, wrote, "The greatest evil is not done now in those sordid dens of crime that Dickens loved to paint. It is not even done in concentration camps and labor camps. In those, we see its final result. But it is conceived and ordered, moved, seconded, carried, and minuted in clear, carpeted, warmed, and well-lighted offices by quiet men with white collars and cut fingernails and smooth-shaven cheeks who do not need to raise their voice." Well, because these quiet men do not raise their voices, because they sometimes speak in soothing tones of brotherhood and peace, because like other dictators before them, they're always making their final territorial demand, some would have us accept them at their word and accommodate ourselves to their aggressive impulses. But if history teaches anything, it teaches that simple-minded appeasement or wishful thinking about our adversaries is folly. It means the betrayal of our past, the squandering of our freedom. So I urge you to speak out against those who would place the United States in a position of military and moral inferiority. You know, I've always believed that old Screwtape reserved his best efforts for those of you in the church. So in your discussions of the nuclear freeze proposals, I urge you to beware the temptation of pride, the temptation of blithely declaring yourselves above it all and label both sides equally at fault, to ignore the facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire, to simply call the arms race a giant misunderstanding, and thereby remove yourself from the struggle between right and wrong and good and evil.
Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show on this President's Day, and we hope you're enjoying some of these presidential speeches that we're sharing with you. And I tell you, Ronald Reagan's really one of the greatest orators that we've ever had as president, and we got another speech of his to share with you. Now, this is 4 years after the speech that we just shared, the Evil Empire speech that he gave to the National Association of Evangelicals. Now, fast forward, and here he is standing in front of the Berlin Wall in 1987. And this is particularly timely today when we got people who want to vote for a so-called, quote-unquote, democratic socialist. You need to think about what you're getting into.
And now the Soviets themselves may, in a limited way, be coming to understand the importance of freedom. We hear much from Moscow about a new policy of reform and openness. Some political prisoners have been released. Certain foreign news broadcasts are no longer being jammed. Some economic enterprises have been permitted to operate with greater freedom from state control. Are these the beginnings of profound changes in the Soviet state, or are they token gestures intended to raise false hopes in the West or to strengthen the Soviet system without changing it? We welcome change and openness, for we believe that freedom and security go together, that the advance of human liberty can only strengthen the cause of world peace. There is one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate.
Here it comes.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Oh, wasn't that a great moment? Some of us can remember that moment. I remember that moment myself. And we had another moment to share with you from President George W. Bush. We're running out of time on that one, and that was his bullhorn speech after 9/11. I'm sure many of you will remember. But I did want to get to one final presidential speech today, and that is President Trump's State of the Union, the best is yet to come portion of his speech from just this year. We haven't gotten to share this one with you yet, and we really enjoyed it, so I want to share that with you now.
America is a land of heroes, a place where greatness is born, where destinies are forged, and where legends come to life. This is the home of Thomas Edison and Teddy Roosevelt, of many great generals, including Washington, Pershing, Patton, and MacArthur. This is the home of Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, Amelia Earhart, Harriet Tubman, the Wright brothers, Neil Armstrong, and so many more. This is the country where children learn names like Wyatt Earp, Davy Crockett, and Annie Oakley. This is the place where the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth and where Texas patriots made their last stand at the Alamo. The American nation was carved out of the vast frontier by the toughest, strongest, fiercest, and most determined men and women ever to walk on the face of the earth. Our ancestors braved the unknown, tamed the wilderness, settled the Wild West, lifted millions from poverty, disease, and hunger, vanquished tyranny and fascism, ushered the world to new heights of science and medicine, laid down the railroads, dug out the canals, raised up the skyscrapers. Our ancestors built the most exceptional republic ever to exist in all of human history, and we are making it greater than ever before. This is our glorious and magnificent inheritance. We are Americans. We are pioneers. We are the pathfinders. We settled the new world. We built the modern world. And we change history forever by embracing the eternal truth that everyone is made equal by the hand of Almighty God. America is the place where anything can happen. America is the place where anyone can rise. And here, on this land, on this soil, on this continent, the most incredible dreams come true. This nation is our canvas, and this country is our masterpiece. We look at tomorrow and see unlimited frontiers just waiting to be explored. Our brightest discoveries are not yet known. Our most thrilling stories are not yet told. Our grandest journeys are not yet made. The American age, the American epic, the American adventure has only just begun. Our spirit is still young. The sun is still rising. God's grace is still shining. And my fellow Americans, the best is yet to come.
Wow. That was pretty good, wasn't it?
You're not supposed to have recording devices in the Hall of Presidents at Walt Disney World.
Yeah, we didn't add the music. Somebody did on Twitter, and I got a hold of it, and I liked it, so I didn't go get the one without the music. Well, speaking of the music's about to start playing, but we did want to at least honor our Out There segment and refer back to what's now called COVID-19. That's the coronavirus, the novel corona. I know, it's coming. The director of the CDC, Center for Disease Control, says it's coming here to the U.S. The World Health Organization Director General says we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. Now, so far, we've got over 70,000 reported cases, most of which are in China, and over 2,000 fatalities. That's double the number of fatalities reported that we had last week when we reported on it last week. And these are just the reported fatalities. If you listen to some commentators, there may be a lot more people than that have died from it. And the crematoriums around Wuhan seem to be functioning in overdrive. One other piece of information, because it keeps going back and forth, and I see scientists saying that it's impossible that this is some kind of bioweapon, as though they've spent any time so far studying it. But there's actually a study that came out of South China University of Technology from a couple of Harvard postdoctoral students who are very well-known scientists, and they concluded that the killer coronavirus probably originated from a laboratory in Wuhan. So, you know, when you're talking about scientists, as they used to say on the internet, your mileage may vary. And everybody seems to have an opinion, but we'll find out in the future what's really going to happen from all this. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.